All right, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, we've had a really, really busy day. We appreciate everybody for their patience with us. It looks like the chat is starting to fill up with some people, which is awesome. I'm in a hotel room in Cincinnati, my old town here. My family and I, our 3 pets, have made the trip from Atlanta to Cincinnati. Now we're going to go Cincinnati to Chicago tonight to see some family. We're really excited to see them, including my nephew John, who is an avid listener to the show, a big time Packer fan, and has really hated watching their last couple games. Thomas, you had a dentist appointment today. You're looking great. The teeth are pearly white per usual, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, but yeah, I'm sorry about that. I've been all over the place, as you know. I just got back from my trip out west doing some work, trying to secure some network connections, which are really important for us, right? And then today had other calls with potential teams and customers, et cetera, et cetera. So suffice it to say, it's been busy. So thanks for your patience, everyone, for sure. But I do want to say this. The excitement of trying to get on here and talk. You were on the call on another call we had today, and I tried to get on and I was flapping around because I couldn't speak. I had to turn the entire presentation over to you, and you killed it, just so everyone knows, in the spirit of, Sumer rocking and rolling. Eric Eager, I call him, he just killed it. So nicely done.
Now, people will forget this, but I will never forget this. In my hometown newspaper growing up, always misspelled my name in the football section of the newspaper. Egar was how they spelt it. Little did they know that I'd be working with you someday, and you would mispronounce it the same way on purpose. I'm assuming that was part of their purview. We really do appreciate everybody coming in. Michael says happy holidays, everybody. Beat Gamer says, will we get Thomas D talking about Tommy D, referring to Tommy DeVito, backup quarterback? I do want to, though, and this is like part of we missed Monday. We had Tage and Ben on to talk about the games, but we haven't talked since the Los Angeles Chargers lost, if I recall correctly, 63-21 to the Las Vegas Raiders, a team themselves with a interim coach. They go ahead and fire not only Brandon Staley, but also Tom Telesco, their longtime 11-year GM. He almost got the same number of years as you, Thomas, but you ended up eking that out in terms of longevity there. It was a move that I think many people believed had to happen. I don't think that they really wanted to do it before the season ended, but that was a very jarring loss to a division rival in front of the entire country. When you think back, Tom, or you look at this Chargers job, I kind of think that this is I think it's popular to say that this is a pretty good job, but I tend to agree with all the people who say that this is a pretty attractive place for somebody to go if they're trying to win football games.
Okay, first, yes, let me lead in on this. It's too bad. I always feel bad for my contemporaries there, and Tom Telesco and I worked together for many years as far as in the league. Tom and I were both on the GMAC, general manager's advisory committee, for quite a while. Tom was actually the chairman up until just recently when he was named co-chairman of the GMAC. That's a reputable, legitimate committee within the NFL. He shared the GMAC co-leadership role with Andrew Berry, who will now be taking over with the absence of Tom Telesco. Just so everyone knows, Tom Telesco, very well respected in the league, good football mind, as we all know, worked behind a Hall of Famer in Bill Polian over the years, Dave Caldwell. He's been around it a long time, like you said. Now, you move forward, you have a family like the Spanos family who is deeply seated in so many elements of football in the NFL, right? Dean Spanos, the owner, has a son who is our generation. He's a little bit younger than me, but he's in his 40s. He's now the president, right? He's the president of football operation. John Spanos, another well-respected individual. John and his dad talk about this. They have a great relationship with Tom Telesco. Brandon Staley, that's a little bit of another situation. They have to make a really, really tough move after something that was fairly egregious, right? I'm a big believer in you wait until the end of the season and look at what's going on with the general manager. I don't mind, and I say it respectfully to my head coaching buddies, brother, that you have to sometimes make something to see if you can keep it going and maybe eke out the next 3 wins. When you fire a general manager with the season left, it happened to me. Again, I have a really good relationship with Arthur Blank. I didn't agree with it, but sometimes it has to happen. So Tom Telesco leaves, he regroups, and now what John Spanos and company have to do at the Chargers is figure out what they're doing. They bring in JoJo Wooden, who was an assistant general manager, is now the interim GM. The head coach is Giff Smith, right? This is a big thing. You saw recently, and I know I'm rolling here, but and I don't have that much coffee in me. You saw recently that they made mention that they are not going to try to win the sweepstakes for the draft and lose games. They want to win games, and that's where Arthur Blank would have been, right? I mean, I know that having worked with them. The Spanos are a proud family. They're not just losing and tanking. So here we are. Let's talk a little bit about this. So this is a big move here with an organization with only 3 games left. It must have been that bad for them, of course, as it was. What are your thoughts on that from a fan base standpoint and from an analytical standpoint?
Yeah, I think they're in a perfect position because, they say, they're like, I think it's really easy for them to say like, hey, we're going to try to win all these games. I mean, meanwhile, the quarterback has a broken hand. He's going to go on. He's on an IR. Easton Stick was the first guy to start. And you look at their schedule moving forward. They host the Bills, who are kind of red hot right now after beating Kansas City and beating Dallas. They go to Denver to play the Broncos on New Year's Eve, and then they host Kansas City, a team that'll probably have something to play for. So their chances of winning any one of those games are pretty small. Mm-hmm. So they don't necessarily have to have the appearances of, like, they might lose out even if they try. You know what I'm saying? Which is almost a perfect situation because you get to get an eval on the players, the Quentin Johnstons of the world even like looking at like different ways of using Derwin James and, can Khalil Mack hold on a little bit, et cetera. You get to like play all your guys and you still might lose enough games to have a high draft pick. And when you look at what has really hurt this football team, it's they haven't been able to complement Herbert as well as they want to. They took Quentin Johnston, in the draft. He was the first wide receiver taken after Jackson Smith and Njigba. And he hasn't really done it. They don't have a downfield threat, but you look at the draft now, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., those are 2 guys that may be within range for them in the early parts. So they might be able to, give it the good old college try the last 3 games, still lose them all, finish the season 5-12, and then actually be able to get a draft pick that can help them right away. And so I think they're almost in a perfect world in that situation where they don't have to tank, and they still might end up with a decent draft pick because of the way in which it's lined up for them, which their schedule is pretty hard.
Well, okay. So now let's move back to management again, as we normally do. I tend to jump back over there from the players for a minute. Right now, you have a lot of work to be done by John, the son, who's the president. Where they're going to go with the coaching situation. Let's talk about that for a minute. When you start looking at Bill Belichick potentially being a candidate out there, and you look at guys like Dan Quinn, there are legit people out there that are going to come in there. In my mind, they need to look strongly at how they want to approach this, right? They had a young guy, and he gets beaten up. I don't want to go in here and assassinate Brandon Staley because obviously he's a smart guy. Things just didn't work out the way they wanted to work out. Do they go in, and what decision do they make? Do they want a tried and true, legitimate guy who's got big-time cachet like Bill? I think Dan Quinn has big-time cachet. I think Dan is the type of person that would situate very well in there as well. I'm not saying Ben Johnson wouldn't. I just don't see them. No reason to say this. I can't see.
And I think we lost Thomas there for a little bit. We'll try to get Thomas back. I think he's talking a little bit about some of the things that they have, with the coaching staff and everything. Are we going to get Thomas back here? I until we get Thomas back, and I know he's gone for a second year. Let me go ahead and actually and present here a little bit of the situation that the Chargers are dealing with with respect to their salary cap. So I'm gonna line up here over the cap here for 2024. I think that the alarming thing. Okay, we have Thomas back. I'm going to add Thomas back to the mix now. Thomas, while you were, go ahead and finish your thought for a second. Then I want to talk about their salary cap situation.
Do you have me on? I'm sorry about that.
I have you. You're good. No, we're good.
Okay, let me finish my thought. Do they go in and have someone who's young, like, a coordinator from Detroit who's he's all the rage, but every year I'm kind of not souring on that, but I'm kind of like tempering that. There are some damn good coaches that are like Ben Johnson who get an opportunity. They may work out, they may not. You never know. However, and this isn't just a running up the flagpole for the veteran coach, but the more I'm around it, the more I see the importance of that for certain organizations to differentiate between, I don't want another young person who has to kick everything off again.
Yep.
Let's bring in a veteran. Those two guys that I mentioned, I think, are legit. I think if Mike Tomlin ever comes available, he's a legit consideration. There are people out there that can come into that Chargers organization, I think, work very well with John Spanos, move in the right direction. But what they're saying is money's not an issue. A lot of people think with the Chargers, money's an issue, and they won't go out there and spend a ton of money on people. They categorically said that is not the case, which I love to hear. It's what's best for the organization. That's what Dean Spanos has been quoted on. I believe John Spanos has as well. This is going to be an important deal here. Who goes out there? Who's going to go in there? You know this. A guy like Bill Belichick, a guy like Dan Quinn, if he gets another chance, or even Tomlin, I'm just throwing out names, are going to say, wow, this is one of the better, more talented, pure talented quarterbacks out there. How are we going to get him, developed into being the best quarterback he can? And who can we put around him? And I think it starts with a very, very legitimate head coach, and they're going to have their pick at it, in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. And there were reports today that they were interested in Jim Harbaugh, the former head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, the current coach of the Michigan Wolverines, and frankly, Thomas, former San Diego Chargers quarterback, back in the day, and another guy who's had his success. Now, the college to NFL pipeline has not been particularly fruitful. You think about Dennis Erickson, and you think about Nick Saban and guys like that, but guys like Pete Carroll, who have experience in both, have had success before. And of course, we don't have as many, like Jimmy Johnson, for example, was a very Barry Switzer back in the day. Those were successful successful coaches there. I agree with you. My only comeback would be the Frank Reich thing, where I think Carolina tried to do that with Frank Reich, and Frank didn't work as much. But what I can see, and we're not like breaking any new ground here, I think that the Spanoses in Los Angeles are hands off enough to let a guy like Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, Dan Quinn kind of do their thing and not necessarily get in the way. Whereas, in Carolina, it was different when they hired Frank Reich as a veteran coach. And so I don't necessarily want to over-index on that. But that is one example of bringing a guy in who's had success that didn't work. But I think that there are other situations, especially with this Chargers team, where, God, it's really attractive to look at the quarterback. Now, I do want to bring this up, and I was going to talk about it.
Can I say one thing? One thing before you go on? And I'm not debating you on this. Frank Reich, I think, is a good football coach, semantically responsible here. However, he's not Bill Belichick or Mike Tomlin. Dan and Dan, I don't want to get into an argument of who's better there or whatever. He's not that, right? So these veteran coaches that can come into an organization that has history to it and understands the importance of having a coach, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they approach this, and they're going to do their due diligence on it. So we'll go back to your point. Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that you're right. I mean, Reich is strictly below Dan in the sense that Dan went to a Super Bowl, obviously, as you know, and Frank never got out of the second round of the playoffs. But like that is something to think about. We're on over the cap right now. The one thing that to me keeps this job from necessarily being the best is obviously this situation here where they have 38 players under contract next year, but they are $42 million over the projected cap. $20 million of that is J.C. Jackson, a deal that they had to get off of. But you look at some of these deals, Thomas, and they're not all that bad, right? So if you were to, Khalil Mack is a $23 million savings if you were to let him go. Mike Williams is a $20 million. So you already have the whole thing worked out there. Keenan Allen is $23 million. So you can get comfortably under the cap, Thomas, with a few moves. I think the problem is as somebody who's run a team before and knows what if you get rid of Khalil Mack, you have to replace him with another starter, right? And if you let go of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, who is he going to throw to? That's been the problem the whole time, right? So I think that's the tough thing. But as you know, as somebody who drafted a franchise quarterback, if you have a franchise quarterback, it really does help.
It does. And I'm going to bring it back for a second to Tom Telesco. There's a reason why the Spanoses had the patience they did with Tom, given the fact that, unfortunately, the head coaches that they brought in, weren't always working, of course, as they wanted them to. Usually a general manager, just so everyone knows, in today's world, gets 2 pops at it. Tom had 3, which is a testament to their belief in Tom, right? Tom is a financially sound manager. He understands putting together along, with the right people in their organization, putting together the right contracts. It's in any way, it's not a cluster there, to your point. So that's another thing. When an agent brings his head coach into the mix, thinking about coming to a place or going to a place like the Chargers, they look at everything. They look at the quarterback. They look at the ownership, ability to work with the ownership, definitely look at the finances, and the finances are not in a cluster there. They're in a solid spot there, of course, that they can continue to grow with.
Correct. And you look at the other places. I mean, Las Vegas, that job is probably open. They don't have a quarterback. Washington doesn't really have a quarterback. If they were to move on from Rivera, Carolina has a quarterback, but I don't know, they're committed to that quarterback. And if you come in and you're not a particularly big fan of him, you think about Gary Kubiak when it was David Carr back in the day. And, like those are hard. You need 1 year of kind of like deciding, right? Or in the case of Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, it was Justin Fields. And sometimes, but when a guy is like legitimately good, like Herbert, it really is an attractive place. And you think about with Belichick, and this is one thing I wanted to spell, because a lot of people talk when they want to talk about Belichick, they want to say, so you think he's not a good coach anymore and all this. And there are questions like somebody wrote here, Mojal, one of our listeners, was like, Belichick is 71. He's a GOAT, but he's 71. I think some coaches at certain points of their career are better at just driving the car than building the car from scratch. And I think Belichick coming in there with a great quarterback, that was the formula for all of his success in New England. And so he's going to have that in LA if he goes to LA. I don't think we're going to be as disappointed as a lot of people think.
Look, I want to say you said it was Mojo. Is that who it was?
Yeah.
Look, I agree that normally you would look at someone who happened to be in their 70s as a coach. You're like, okay, really, where is he? How old was Dick Vermeil when he came back into the fray?
Good question. Dick Vermeil, by the way, one of the best in our coaching metric. So when Dick Vermeil came back to the St. Louis Rams, so he was 30. So he's 87 now. So that would have been 25 years. So he was in his 60s, early 60s. So not young.
Okay. Well, but what I'd say about Bill, and I've said this to you all before, listener-wise, think this. Yes, if you're just some rando coach who's just hanging on, Bill is categorically one of the very best ever coach in this game. And I am honestly saying this with as much of an open mind as I can. And I think Bill has the opportunity to come in somewhere. I've said to you all as well, when he's around the owners' meetings, when we're walking around there, the cachet that he has, the ear that he has of everyone, even the most adept coaches, the Andy Reids and the Pete Carrolls of the world, everyone hangs off to what he is saying, right? He's economically sound. He's an economics major, as it was. He puts together teams smart. People can argue about his ability to pick second rounders or whatever else that is. Goes into wherever he goes in, surrounds himself with the right personnel men. This guy is still incredibly sharp. He's incredibly passionate about doing what's right. And he is, I'm saying this right now, and you guys can quote me, and the papers can quote me. He is the individual out there that's going to bring a team within the next 3 years as close to a Super Bowl as possible, if not winning a Super Bowl, than anyone. So if there's a team out there that wants to get there, they know that they're going to be dealing with Bill understanding Bill's personality, and his personality is as the GOAT. He is the dude. He's going to come in there and be the czar of that organization, in my mind. He's going to be able to work with people, but he is the guy where the buck stops there. He's not just going in there and going to kowtow in any way to a general manager or even to an owner for that matter. He's going to be mindful, but he has still got it, and he can still win a ton of games. Got to make sure you have the right players around, which is obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But he also does a great job. I've said this many times. He's very, very smart with who he brings into his group. And I've said this, even if he had two players that one was exponentially better, but didn't do the three things that he wanted that player to do, as well as the guy who was a third rounder versus a first rounder, he can win with the third rounder because he knows exactly how to play those players. And I think that's an incredibly special point to Bill Belichick. And he does have his staff really work on developing players. That's what makes him attractive as well. So, look, long and short of it is, Mojo, is that what we said?
Yeah, Mojo. Yep.
Mojo. Hey, man, I get it, but bear with me on it because I really think that he can come in here and win some serious football games moving forward with whatever team he might go to.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And the point I'm trying to make is just because the string has run out on somebody in one place doesn't mean they can't. Like, I think about this, right? Like, I think, Tony Dungy. Was Tony Dungy a worse coach than John Gruden? No, right? But like, it had worked its course. Was Andy Reid a worse coach than Chip Kelly? No, but it worked it like. And so one question I do have though, because I do think this second stanza, and now this isn't Belichick's, but for all intents and purposes, he made all of his money in New England for the most part. Do you think, because I know that Andy Reid, when he got to Kansas City, he gave up some of the personnel power to eventually John Dorsey, and John Dorsey helped him rebuild that roster in Kansas City. And then once they had a power struggle, then they went with Brett Veach, and now Brett Veach has, some stature in that building. Do you think that there is at all an opportunity for Belichick to reset? Because I know, like, we've all been in this position before where, when I was at Pro Football Focus, I was doing every GD thing that we had in, like, so it's nice to like reset and be like, I'm doing this stuff and somebody else can take care of this stuff. Now, I don't think Belichick would give up 53.
Is that gosh darn, by the way? Gosh darn for you.
Yeah, gosh darn, of course. Yeah. I don't think Belichick would ever give up 53. I don't even think he'd give up de facto GM. But do you think that there would be some sort of like reset on, I'm really good at coaching. I'm the best coach that's ever coached. I'm going to have a personnel man, whether that be the GM or whether that be like a Pioli, how Pioli was, have a guy there that is more of a heavy hitter from a roster building standpoint so that they avoid some of the things that ended up hurting them in New England, with roster building and stuff like that at the very end. Do you think that that's at all a possibility in Belichick's next stop?
I do. I think it's definitely, I mean, Bill is going to go there in my mind, again, not answering for, or, acting like I know exactly what Bill is thinking, of course, but a man like Bill and his background, he is going to have the right people doing the right things for him within the organization from a personnel standpoint. And more than likely, he's going to have someone close to him that has a real good understanding of the Patriot paradigm. And a lot of those Patriot paradigm people have moved on. Interestingly enough, Bill Belichick also has someone who is the interim GM at the Chargers right now in JoJo Wooden, who was with him, I believe. They were together or indirectly together. JoJo's really, really close with Scott Pioli. There's a mix there, right? It's a really interesting league that way. That it's interesting how that plays out, right? There are a lot of ties and 6 degrees of separation in this league. So the point is, I mean, Bill will surround him with the right himself with the right personnel people that'll take as much of that off the plate as possible until Bill needs to step in, put the final touches on the roster, which is what he does.
Here's a good question, because I know I do, and Sean's such a good listener. I want to get this up here. Do you think that analytics and modern cap management have eroded the edge Belichick had as a GM in the early 2000s?
Well, I'm sorry.
I don't think so. So let me ask you. Okay, I'll say it again. do you think that the analytics and modern cap management have eroded the edge Belichick had as the GM in the early 2000s? So I have an answer to this, and I want to see what you think. So look, Belichick is not doing some of the fourth down stuff that a lot of the other people are. Now, Brandon Staley, in some ways, eroded the confidence that Chargers brass, the fan base, the NFL in general had in him by being too aggressive on fourth downs early in his career and then throttled back. So I think that there's a cautionary tale there. However, I think from a team building standpoint, Belichick made a lot of really progressive moves during the course of his time. Like cutting Lawyer Malloy when he was one of the most popular players on the team was very, very, very woke. If trading Richard Seymour for a first round pick in 2009, and again, was a very forward facing move. Trading for Brandon Cooks in 2017 because the data suggested he had no idea how to draft wide receivers. And again, he'd probably tell you this, right? But them farming out the drafting of wide receivers to other teams for a year, that got them another Super Bowl appearance. I think that he knows roster building. I think the hard part is it is incredibly hard. It is incredibly hard to win football games in the NFL when you do not have an elite quarterback. And so he's been working for the last 4 years with Cam Newton, who is over the hill, Mac Jones, who, and they made the playoffs with Mac Jones. And then now it's Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. I think that, and again, I'm not trying to give Brady a lot of credit, but he deserves a lot of credit. I'm saying that I think it's really hard to win in the NFL when you don't have a 6 to 9 kind of quarterback on your guys' scale, right? I mean, that's it, right? That's the big part of it, and that's what makes Los Angeles so attractive, I think.
It's what makes them attractive for sure, and I agree with you 100%.
I think we got Thomas on mute here. We're working a little bit towards we got Thomas on mute here. We're gonna have to get him back as he works through his phone. I know we're having some computer issues, and we're gonna get him working out here to get him back. My video editing skills will be put on display here during the post-production of this podcast. Okay. So while Thomas is sort of working out that detail here, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what the subject of the show is going to be. And we got Thomas back a little bit. We got to remove Thomas there. Okay, we're back.
You got me?
We have you. Yep.
Sorry about this. Every time a call comes in, it's honest to God, everyone. It's like today is where we want to be every day with Sumer. We are rolling today. We're getting calls. We're getting people calling because 'tis the season, right? They're at
that's the thing. I mean, if people don't know by now, we're involved in obviously consulting roster management. We're involved in coaching selection, GM selection, all of that stuff. If you I think that people, and so it's all kinds of stuff. Yeah, exactly. And of course we have the holiday season too, where we're going from meeting to meeting and working from a place in Cincinnati and all this kind of stuff. So it is certainly busy. Let's go ahead because of technical. Let's finish on one topic here that I want to talk about, because we've talked about this privately a little bit, and I do want to honor somebody here. My favorite, at least the top 2 backup quarterback is in the chat right now. The QB school, JT O'Sullivan, backup quarterback. If I remember correctly, 49ers, Packers, Vikings, Detroit Lions, Cincinnati Bengals. Tell me if I'm missing any, JT, but we have JT here. One of the things that I was texting through to you the other day was because we have so many backup quarterbacks starting in the NFL, and I'm watching the Steelers play the Colts, and I'm watching Mitch Trubisky, who's a former number 2 overall pick. No longer is even the backup there. They're going to start Mason Rudolph instead of him this week, struggling mightily. And you have Gardner Minshew, who's a 6th-round pick. Gardner Minshew is one phone call from Mike Leach away from basically being an insurance salesman in one of the Carolinas, right? Because remember, he was going to go be Mac Jones and Tua's backup, and then they called him over to Washington State, and he was really good. And now he has that team, Thomas, at 8-6 and firmly in the playoff race in the AFC. And I was thinking to myself, and maybe I'm overprescribing, but I'd much rather have a Gardner Minshew as my backup quarterback than a failed first round pick like Mitch Trubisky. And I'm not picking on Mitch. It's a lot of these guys are like this. David Carr was like this, all this stuff. And I'm wondering if there's any validity to it, because obviously you've had your share of picking backups. You had Matt Schaub, who's a former starter in the NFL. You had TJ Yates. You had Chris Redmond. You had all these you had different stripes, right, of different kind of guys who played backup quarterback for you. And I kind of want to get your take, because I think it's really hard to try to reclaim a first round pick as a backup quarterback in the NFL because of all the baggage and all of that stuff. Whereas if you have a guy like Gardner Minshew who's kind of hungry, he's willing to sort of like take a back seat and prepare like a backup, but play like a starter when he's in there. Like, is there anything to that, or am I just kind of over indexing on what I'm seeing in a few of these games?
No, look, let's start by saying when you have a former first rounder that didn't work, oftentimes we look at them from an evaluation standpoint and we think they're, full of skills, right? Completely laden with skills at a lot of levels, right? And you're thinking that's enticing. Bringing it back to your point, I would much rather have JT, given you introduced him as being on here. I don't know why you still haven't brought him on in a three-way with us. Let's do that soon if he's willing.
Looks like Thomas getting another call. Yeah, unfortunate quote by Thomas there, by the way. But we'll probably have JT on at some point soon. But yeah, I think so. Where he's going, I think, is this idea. Okay, we got Thomas back. Yep. Do we have Mr. Dimitroff?
My back.
You're back. Yep. Thomas, can you hear me?
Well.
Yep. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. All right. Let's see if we can get Thomas back one more time. Okay. But yeah, I think the big discussion, and I sort of wrote about this for Pro Football Focus a few years ago, is this idea of getting a backup quarterback in there with, I would say, minimal variance, Thomas. So Thomas, you were saying before you jumped off that a quarterback who's a former first rounder, right? You're enticed by the ability, you're enticed by the potential. But I think in a lot of ways, if that potential still had a non-zero chance of manifesting itself, it would be like, you know what I'm saying? Like that player would be a star. Like I think of Baker Mayfield, who is a guy who's caused us some disagreement on the show. Like Baker Mayfield is not a backup. He's a low-end starter in the NFL. And so he's always going to get that chance. Zach Wilson is not a starter in the NFL, is kind of the idea. And so if you keep him along, you're getting all the bad. And we've already kind of established that the good isn't necessarily all that possible, yeah?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, this keeps cutting out. Before it cuts out again, my point was I'd much rather have a JT where we're talking about there are legit quarterbacks out there that can move up to be the starter and win you games without, to your point about the baggage, the mental baggage, the baggage that it carries within your organization. That becomes complicated for the injured quarterback that might be put aside for game 2, 3, or 4. It just causes a lot of issues. Now, I know that seems like you want to get the best person in there, but a backup usually has a really good grasp of what their role is. They're comfortable, they're confident, they're coming in strong, feeling like, hey, if I'm in here for 2 games, 4 games, or 1 game, I'll do what's best for the team. And a guy like JT and others like that, we had him. Schaub, I know Schaub was a first rounder and such, or I can't remember the exact.
He was a second or third rounder. Sorry, he was a starter in the NFL, to your point.
He was a starter in the NFL. But my point is they can come in and have a grasp of what they can do for the team, get you out of a bind and move forward. And then when the starter's ready to come back, you bring them back in. I've never been a big fan on searching the ranks and see if we can be the next team that brings along that guy. And there are some good ones, as you know, but to me, there's just too much involved in it. At least that's how I approached it.
Yeah, I think like people see the Steve Young thing in San Francisco and they want to over-index to that because Steve Young was, kind of off to a bad start in Tampa, and then he goes and sits behind Joe Montana, and but that was also a navigation of one of the best coaches to ever coach the game in Bill Walsh, right? And how he played Montana and Young against each other, almost to the point where when George Seifert took over, that they were better because they had some of the back, he was Montana's the starter, now Young's the backup, and there weren't that only so many coaches have the cachet to sort of play two great quarterbacks against each other. And I think for the most part, there's also the baggage of, you don't want to challenge your starter too much as far as a confidence sort of aspect. So and this is an interesting topic. We just have a lot of backup starting right now. And I kind of want to think about, from a team building standpoint, we haven't really talked about that at all, which is to say we know that finding a starting quarterback is really hard. But of course, now we're starting to see how hard it is because sometimes that guy doesn't even stay healthy.
Here's an interesting thought. We have always, when we brought up, and again, I keep coming back to JT because he's in the house today. You keep coming back to guys like that who have not really had an opportunity to be around the starting group, right? When they get into the preseason, they're usually there with 3s and 4s. And I've never felt it was like a truly fair assessment until you get them in an opportunity to be around the right O-line and around the studs. All of a sudden, there's some good ones out there. Might not be necessarily bona fide starters, but around that kind of talent, they're darting the balls around. To your point, they're starting and they're winning games. That, to me, is a true assessment of what you have in your backup. You don't get a chance to do that often.
Yeah, and to your point, one of my good friends, Sage Rosenfels, who's the all-time leader in preseason, passing. So I can't remember which stat it is, but he's one of the all-time leaders in passing in the preseason. 4th-round pick, traded after 1 year. Again, bouncing around. But those guys, when I talk to Sage, and when I talk to, obviously, JT has a million followers on YouTube because he's so good at understanding the game. A lot of these guys just really understand the game of football because they've sort of seen everything. And in a lot of ways, I was and I'll end on this because I know we got to get going, but I'll end on this. Part of me believes, so you think about Tim Tebow, right? And how Tim Tebow really struggled in accuracy and all this kind of stuff. I personally believe that Tim Tebow would have had a much better chance if he would have sat for a bunch of years because they threw him out there and he had to work on Aaron Rodgers when he came out of Cal was one of the most robotic, his delivery and all that stuff was very mechanical, very, all the there was a lot of stuff wrong with Aaron Rodgers when he got in. And then when he finally played, you were he looks totally different than he looked like at Cal. They broke it down. And I fear that with a lot of these guys that are highly drafted, they get thrown in there right away. And they have no opportunity to wring out the bad habits that they had when they got in. And Tebow was just kind of out, as an outlier because his throwing mechanics were so bad. But if you would have had, so when he gets in a game, he instinctively only knows how to throw the way he's always thrown, which is a bad mechanical thing. Whereas with Rodgers, you broke the thing down, you got him kind of in a very good place where when he's finally time to start, he looks like he's developed into a really good player. And I fear sometimes that backup quarterbacks, the guys that are failed starters, do they ever just break it down? Are they ever afforded the opportunity, Thomas, to break it down and to re-engineer their mechanics and get that thing? I don't think they do. And as such, I don't think they're necessarily going to have success because the thing that kept them from having success in the first place is so wired into what they're doing because they were thrown out there so fast.
Great comments. I know we got to roll, buddy, but right. I love it.
This has been a good one. For anybody that's listening live, just be a little bit patient. We're gonna do some editing just to make sure that Thomas doesn't come in sideways like he did the one time. But this was a great time. Good chat about the Chargers. Good chat about backup quarterbacks. We want to thank you all for joining. For Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show. Happy holidays to everybody. We really appreciate you. Hopefully that you have a great time over the next few days with your friends and family. Have a good one.